started. So I'm so excited to present to you today how to use mindfulness for mental health challenges. Chris Godden is our presenter for today, and we're so excited to have you here today. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to just turn it over to you now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let me start my share here. All right. And I'm sure Karen will jump in if you can't see this, but I'm going to assume that you can. So first off, let me say thank you, Karen. Thank you all of NAMI for having me. I'm so thrilled to talk on this topic today because I just find it so important, so essential to my personal mental health, but also in working with my patients and just everything that I see with mental health issues. Using mindfulness as a tool, I think, is absolutely essential, just in how effective it is and in how free it is. That's very helpful in everything that we're trying to deal with when it comes to mental health, whether it's anxiety, depression, really any sort of mental health issue, just daily stress. Even mindfulness can be a really effective tool for all of that. So thank you for allowing me to present this information, and we'll get into it here. So I want to start first by talking a little bit about what potentially your preconceived notions are when it comes to mindfulness. For me, this is kind of what I think of when I first think of mindfulness, particularly mindfulness meditation. This image kind of comes to mind. The Buddhist monk sitting in this pose with a very straight back, with the trees in the background, probably, hundreds of miles away from any traffic noise or, work stresses. And you kind of get the sense that they're able to sit here for hours and just clear their mind completely. And I want to dispel this notion that, number one, the point of mindfulness is not to clear your mind. That is not what we're going for. We're going to talk about what we are going for, but it's basically training your mind to focus on what you want it to focus on, rather than going for a ride that your mind is taking you on. And oftentimes it can feel that way, particularly with anxiety, depression, stress. It's like it's going off and doing its thing, and you're just kind of holding on and having to ride these emotions. Mindfulness trains you to not have to be the passenger, but instead be the driver. Okay. And then number two, your mindfulness practice, you can have a goal of having it look like this if you'd like, and more power to you. I think that'll be a fantastic journey. But for most of us, this is not what your mindfulness practice has to look like. In fact, I would encourage you to think of it more like this. Now, this picture is of course a little bit tongue in cheek, but the idea is that your mindfulness practice and kind of your how it's going to affect your day to day is not that it's going to just eliminate all of the stress in your life or all of the issues in your life. That's not the case at all. Stressors are still absolutely going to be there. What mindfulness does when you practice it is it helps you change your relationship with those stressors. So the stressors are still there. The anxiety is still there. The depression is still there. Insert your mental health challenge here is still there. But through mindfulness practice, you can change your relationship. You can change your perception of that stressor so that it's not driving you. You are driving it. You have controls of the experience. So even though the stressors are still there, they're not affecting you as much in physiological ways. So we've seen that it can affect your blood pressure, for example, but also in just your day-to-day happiness. So that's kind of the goal with mindfulness, is to look, or at least feel, a little bit more like this. So even when things are swirling around you, you can take a minute to get yourself grounded again and not be overwhelmed by that. So first I wanted to, start with this potentially existential question, but no, it's quite literal. Who am I? And why am I the one talking to you here? So my name is Chris Godden. I am a licensed acupuncturist. That's what that LAC stands for. I'm owner of a company called Balance Wellness, Acupuncture and Herbal Medicine here in Central Austin. Licensed acupuncturist by the Texas Medical Board. And when you hear the name licensed acupuncturist, it's a bit of a misnomer because yes, we are trained in acupuncture, but I'd say it's more appropriate to think of a licensed acupuncturist as a practitioner of integrative medicine. So licensed acupuncturists go to a master's program. It's a 4-year master's program here in the United States, where we learn a combination of Eastern and Western theory as well as techniques. So I like to think of it as kind of you're learning a broad scope of the best of both worlds. So we understand that there are health challenges that are very helpful to look at through the Eastern medicine lens, through the traditional Chinese medicine lens, and potentially use acupuncture or Chinese herbal therapy, cupping therapy, lifestyle changes based on traditional Chinese medicine. There are some issues that respond very, very well to that. It's typically more chronic issues, more of the things that aren't resolved very easily through Western medicine approaches. But then there are other issues that are absolutely best handled from a Western medical approach. And we also utilize, everything that we've learned through Western medical approaches. When traditional Chinese medicine was developed, we didn't have imaging, for example. We didn't have blood tests. We didn't have a lot of these things. We didn't have, honestly, a really clear understanding of anatomy that we just have a much better understanding of. So we utilize all of that. But we utilize, kind of the best of both worlds, like I said. So when it's applicable, we utilize Western medicine, pharmaceuticals, even surgical intervention when it's necessary. But we also have this whole tool bag, so to speak, from several thousand years of traditional Chinese medicine theory and practice. So in that bottom bullet point is just that we use a lot of different tools and techniques to affect change. I'll regularly use any number of these depending on the patient needs. Mindfulness being a prime example for when we're dealing with any sort of mental health challenge, and that's of course what we're talking about today. But first, I wanted to give a little bit more of a backstory of basically how I came to this medicine, because it's such a common question that I get. This is a very accurate picture of me about 10 years ago at this point. I was just having really debilitating back pain. I was working a desk job at the time. My stress was not well managed. My posture was not well managed. And I just had this horrible back pain. I tried to ignore it for a period of time. That didn't work. So I went to my doctor, went to my primary care physician. They, prescribed muscle relaxers because clearly my back was super tight, and then prescribed physical therapy as well. Neither of those really seemed to help, particularly with the pain. They didn't really do much. So after that course, I kind of slowly, through the months and years, went to any practitioner I could find who thought they could give me some relief. So I tried everything from chiropractic, yoga, massage, Rolfing, various intuitive healers. I mean, it was anything and everything you could think of. But it was really an acupuncturist who I saw, and because they were able to employ that kind of lens of integrative medicine and help me understand that, yes, you've got back pain, you've got tight back muscles, but we also need to work on your chest. Your chest is really tight because you're hunched over a computer all the time, and you're not dealing with stress very, very well or at all. And your diet isn't great. So we kind of looked at the big picture, and that was kind of that made all the difference. I mean, it wasn't overnight by any means, but once I started to employ a lot of these different aspects, I started to feel better. And it felt miraculous, honestly, because I'd been dealing with this really debilitating back pain for years. And now I don't anymore. I mean, when I feel any sort of back pain come up, I know what I need to do. And that's huge. So at that point, I decided, I feel like I'm a relatively smart person. Why did it take me years to figure this out for myself? I want to help other people figure this out, hopefully sooner than it took me to figure it out. So that's how I got into the medicine. That's why I feel very fortunate to be able to do what I do, helping people with any sort of pain condition, but also a lot of mental health issues, stress, anxiety, sleep issues. I treat quite a bit of. That's my story. And but today we're going to be talking about mindfulness. Of course, we're going to start with what is mental health, just so that we're all on the same page with that. We'll talk about what is mindfulness. What does mindfulness actually do? So we're going to go into some of the research, some of the more modern research, because even though mindfulness has been around for a long time, we've really gotten some wonderful research over the last several decades. So we'll go into some of that. We're going to go through how exactly to practice mindfulness, and then we're going to actually practice mindfulness. So at the end of this, we're going to do just a little session that I hope you join me with, where we're going to do a mindfulness technique together that you can do while through the presentation here, but that you can also carry along with you and do as needed as you move forward. So mental health, this is probably a bit of a review, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Your mental health is your emotional and psychological well-being. These mental health challenges that people go through are going to range from some more transient daily stress to more chronic conditions. From a traditional Chinese medicine standpoint, emotional, psychological, and physical well-being are all intricately tied together. And this is a more modern Western medicine understanding too, that you can't, for decades for modern Western medicine, we thought we could just divorce the two, but we understand at this point that they're way too linked together to be able to say like, no, this is a mental health thing and has nothing to do with your physical or vice versa. And that's just not true. We've figured that much out. And that's actually part of what we're utilizing when it comes to mindfulness. So a lot of mindfulness practices are reliant upon breathing, upon slow, very intentional breathing. And one of the aspects that makes that so effective is that you're using your physical body, that slow breathing actually has a very clear and powerful effect on your mental state. So it's almost like tricking your body into getting out of a fight or flight response, for example. So if you're breathing really slow, if you're breathing really intentionally, if you're almost like slowing everything down, your brain doesn't have a choice but to slow itself down too. And particularly for those folks who are in that stressed state or kind of have a tendency to get very stressed or get very anxious, that can be really, really powerful. So it's a way to utilize that connection between mental and physical. Strong mental health means being resilient and adaptable in the faces of stressors and challenges. So I have a little story for this part. There's a scientific experiment in Arizona in the late 80s, early 90s called Biosphere 2. And it's actually still going, but that's when it really got a lot of the news headlines. But what they did was they tried to create this second biosphere. So they have these very controlled conditions in the middle of nowhere in Arizona, where they're trying to have an environment similar to that of Earth, but where we are controlling all of the conditions. And the idea is that, if we're able to control everything, we can get a much better understanding of kind of the issues that face our planet. And at the beginning, it was to understand, okay, if we were to colonize another planet, maybe we could use this biosphere. Right now, I think they're using it more for climate change, understanding climate change. But in any case, the project has run into a lot of challenges, a lot of unforeseen challenges, because it's an experiment. We're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. But one of the things that they found relatively early on was that they put trees in this biosphere, and the trees were growing really fast. They're like, whoa, why are these conditions causing the trees to grow so much faster? But then the trees would spontaneously just collapse. They would collapse from the inside, basically. And what they figured out was that they didn't have any wind. They didn't have any wind in the biosphere. So the trees were not being stressed at all. And this was a great scientific discovery, because what we now understand is that the wind that trees are exposed to actually helps them produce different types of wood that are designed to adapt to wind or other physical stressors like that. And the reason that I'm giving this story is because we are very similar. Humans are very similar as well. We need stressors. So again, the point of mindfulness is not to eliminate all of your stressors. It's just not going to happen. But we can use these stressors to help train our nervous system. And so if you've had a lot of stressors in your life, or if you have a predisposition to any given mental illness, that's okay. You can still utilize those. And in fact, in many cases, it's going to make your nervous system stronger. And to speak a little bit more to that, your mental health condition, it is a combination of nature, so your genetic predisposition, but it's also a combination of nurture. So mind-body exercises, diet, supplements, the things that you are doing on a daily basis make a big difference. In fact, we now know that you can turn on and off genes. You can actively turn them on and off based on things that you do. So just because you're predisposed to something, it's not the end of the road by any means. You can still have a vast amount of control over any mental health challenges. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is it's a 2,600-year-old meditation technique derived from Buddhist practice. So it's been around for a very long time. But more recently, starting in, I think late 60s, early 70s, there was a researcher named Jon Kabat-Zinn, who has he's often referred to as like the father of the modern research around mindfulness. So we've come to understand much more recently, compared to the 2,600-year-old history, kind of how mindfulness works and what it does to the brain, what it does to the nervous system. And Kabat-Zinn, who I just mentioned, who's done a lot of research on this, describes mindfulness in one of his books as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So as you'll find out with mindfulness, the idea of it is incredibly simple. The practice of it is not easy. So as Kabat-Zinn is defining it here, it really, all mindfulness is paying attention to whatever it is. Again, it's usually your breath. That's kind of the easiest way and the most common way to do these mindfulness practices. So paying attention to your breath and not allowing your mind to go off and think about, the thousands of things you need to do, or the anxiety, or whatever it might be. And when it inevitably does that, bringing it back to your breath. And over time, the more you do this, the better you get at keeping that attention where you want it. So there's this emphasis on developing detached observation and awareness of consciousness. So instead of allowing anxiety or stressful thoughts or whatever it may be kind of carry you off and getting really wound up about any of these different things, what mindfulness does is it teaches you to be aware of that, be aware of the anxiety, be aware of the depression, be aware of whatever it is, but not let it take you away. So the reason I have this picture on this slide is because sometimes a metaphor is used that it's like clouds going across the sky. So your emotions are going to come across, and sometimes they're going to block out the sun completely. It's going to be really dark, but those clouds will continue and they will pass. And your job is to be that observer and just to watch the clouds. It's not going to do anything to try to move the clouds yourself. You can't do that. So just watch the clouds as they pass. Note how dark they are, but allow them to actually pass. And by doing that over time, you'll get a lot less swept up in the clouds themselves, and you'll be a better steward of your own emotions instead of being swept away by emotions that you don't really care to have. So what does mindfulness do? This is when I'm going to go over some of the research on mindfulness. So one of the things that mindfulness does that we know is that it actually changes the brain. So the brain structures themselves change. They've done these studies where they do an MRI, some imaging of the brain before mindfulness. And then after several weeks of mindfulness, they'll re-image the same brains and just check to see what's changed. And they notice a lot of changes. They notice a lot of changes in memory areas, in a lot of different areas that just allow for a better approach to the world, a better perception of the world. Actual gray matter will increase in these different areas of the brain, and areas that are associated with worry and rumination, those will actually decrease. Like the brain structures themselves won't be as large, which I think is just wild that you can physically change your structures. So we talked about how this can be used to change your gene expression. This goes beyond that. I mean, you're changing the physical structure of your brain and nervous system. So that's very, very powerful stuff. And that's why you're going to get some of the effects that mindfulness can have, is because of that. It also allows you to have an increased connection with your core values. So again, instead of being swept away, by the clouds, so to speak, or being swept away by your anxiety, over time, through mindfulness practice, you are going to be the one to say, like, my core values are X, so I am going to be able to focus my mental energy on that, rather than being swept away by any given thing that makes me stressed or anxious or depressed or anything else. So having that increased connection can be extremely powerful in how you manage your day-to-day life and really your relationship with day-to-day stressors. They just won't affect you as much. There's this reduced fight, flight, or freeze response. So this may be something that maybe a little bit understood or recognizable for folks, is that fight, flight, or freeze response. That it's very easy to be stuck in. It seems like in our current society, particularly if you're paying attention to the news cycle, it's very easy to be stuck in this stress response, which is fight, flight, or freeze. And if you are stuck in that stress response, it can be hard to get out of it. What mindfulness does is it helps you switch that off. So there's another half to your nervous system that is less talked about. So there's that stress response, which is sometimes called fight, flight, or freeze. But then there's this other half called rest and digest. It's your parasympathetic nervous system. And what mindfulness does is it helps activate that parasympathetic nervous system. It gets you into that rest and digest state. That state is where you want to be for the majority of your life. You should be in that state, because that is where your immune system functions the way that it should. Your digestive system functions the way that it should. Cellular repair, getting rid of cancerous cells, all of these things happen in a rest and digest state. If you're in this fight, flight, or freeze state, you're kind of living moment to moment. So your body is thinking, no, we have to be really alert and engaged right now. We don't have time to deal with all of this stuff that's going to help us live to 80 or 90 or whatever. So having something to help you get to that rest and digest state, like mindfulness, is absolutely essential. And I'll also take this moment to say that, that this doesn't happen overnight. It does take practice. That's often why it's called a mindfulness practice. So we will often start at a place where we try to sit down, we try to focus on our breathing, and our mind is just off, and it's crazy. It's just off doing its own thing immediately. In fact, in some of the research, this is called the default state of the mind. It is called monkey brain. Monkey brain, it's just like jumping all over the place and climbing up trees and grabbing bananas, and it's going all over the place and you have no control over it. That is where you should start. That makes absolute sense that you're starting that way. It doesn't mean that there's no hope for you. In fact, that means that you need mindfulness that much more. And each time when you're bringing your focus back to your breath, for example, that you can think of as like a repetition. So when you're first starting out at the gym, you can probably only do a couple of reps at a very light weight, but that's making your muscles stronger. This is the same thing. Each time you bring your attention back to where you want it to be, that's a repetition, and you'll get stronger. And these reps are just helping you do that. So I wanted to share that. Lastly, there's this, you get this perceptual shift away from distressing experiences with mindfulness. So when you do practice mindfulness, because you are the one driving the train, I feel like I'm using this metaphor a lot, but it really is apt. Because you're the one kind of picking where your focus and where your attention is going to be, over time, you're not going to be focusing on the distressing experiences as much. You're not going to be focusing on the anxiety because you probably don't want to. For most folks dealing with anxiety and kind of really in the midst of it, it's like, no, I don't want to be in this state. I don't want to have these ruminating thoughts. I don't want to have these depressive thoughts if it's depression. But I don't see a way out of it. And that's a hard part about the mental illness is that, it makes it hard to see beyond the clouds, so to speak. But through mindfulness and through practicing it, you do get better at that, at shifting that perception. So how to practice mindfulness? And I talked a little bit about this already on the last slide, but it's in bright red here, so you can't tell me that you weren't warned. You will be quote unquote bad at this when you first start. You're not going to be good at focusing on just this one thing, and that's completely normal and that's completely okay. I just encourage you, when you're trying mindfulness, to try to notice when your mind does go off. Don't get mad at yourself when it does go off. Just very gently bring it back to what you're supposed to be focusing on. Okay. And that's going to happen more when you're starting out. And that's good. That just means you're getting more repetitions, right? So you're going to be getting stronger because you're getting more reps at it. So, and even if you don't notice for a while that your brain is off, that's completely fine. When you do notice, just bring it gently back. I also highly encourage you to focus on consistency, not on doing it quote unquote right. Okay. So there is no right or wrong. Really, the main thing is just doing it consistently. The main wrong way to do it, so to speak, is to think that, okay, if I need to do mindfulness, I'll do some maybe once a month. That's not helpful. Even if you're doing a ton once a month, that is not nearly as helpful as doing like 5 minutes every day or 1 minute every day. Doing something every day and then starting to build it into your routine is far more helpful than an hour every month. Okay, so focus on the consistency, not on, am I even doing this right? Am I seeing anything? That will come. Just focus on consistency. And then there are different tools that you can use for mindfulness. So there are apps that you can use, there are books that you can use, and then YouTube can also be a helpful resource. For apps, these are three that I have used and that I recommend a lot. Headspace is, well, all three of these honestly are very popular. I bet you could find 100 more apps in the App Store. So find what works for you. These ones are very well done. Headspace is more like a guided program, I guess would be a way to think about it. Calm and Insight Timer are more like a pick your own adventure. So they have different, Calm and Insight Timer just have a huge library of different types of meditations and mindfulness practices focused on different things. So I just download all three and see what works for you. If you don't want to use an app, there are some good books. Wherever You Go, There You Are by Jon Kabat-Zinn. This is the researcher that I mentioned earlier, who's probably done more research on the subject of mindfulness than anybody else. He's written several books. This is probably his most popular, and it's just a great starting point for learning about mindfulness and various practices, as is Practicing Mindfulness by Matthew Sokolov. This book has a bunch of practical ways that you can practice. So it's just chock full of different things that you can try. So if that sounds appealing to you, you'll get a lot of different approaches, some of which will work for you and some of which will not. And that's okay. Just finding one that works for you that you can stick with is an excellent place to start. And then you can also search YouTube. You can search for 4-7-8 breathing. And honestly, you might want to Google that to learn what it is before you just jump into YouTube and have somebody guide you through it. It is very simple. 4-7-8 breathing just refers to 4 seconds in, 4 seconds breathing in, 7-second hold, 8 seconds breathing out. And you just repeat that while focusing on your breath and on the counting. Box breathing is another technique. This is actually what we are going to be doing together in a couple of slides here, I believe. So I'll speak a little bit more to that when we are getting into it. And then guided mindfulness for fill in the blank. So there are guided mindfulness meditations for anxiety, guided mindfulness meditations for insomnia, whatever it might be. Some of these on YouTube are going to be excellent. Some of them are probably not going to be very great, but find what works for you and go with it. Any of these are great places to start. So let's give it a try. So when you're doing a mindfulness practice, for the most part, I mean, there are walking mindfulness practices and various ways that you can add mindfulness into just your day-to-day life. But for more specific mindfulness meditation practices, you'll want to find a comfortable place to sit. You can also lie down if you find that more comfortable. But for the most part, you'll want to sit relaxed with your feet flat on the ground. Maybe have your hands in your lap. Try to relax your shoulders and just feel like you're in a place where you'll be able to relax for about 2 minutes. That's all that we're going to be doing here today. And we're going to be doing a technique called box breathing. Box breathing is very simple, and I'm very proud of myself because I created a little visual here that hopefully will move. So we'll see if it actually works. But what box breathing is and what we're going to be going through is you're going to breathe in. So we'll start with that green ball in the top left corner. And as it moves across the screen to the top right corner, you're going to breathe in. That's going to be for a count of 4 seconds. Then you're going to hold your breath for a count of 4 seconds. Then you're going to breathe out for a count of 4 seconds. And then you're going to hold your breath for a count of 4 seconds. We're going to do this a total of 4 times. And what I encourage you to do is you can watch the ball and focus on your breathing, or you can close your eyes once you kind of get the hang of it and focus on your breathing and just imagine this box in your mind. So imagine the box, and as you breathe in, you're going across the top of the box. And when you're holding your breath, you're going down the right side of the box. When you're breathing out, the the bottom side of the box, and then holding again. Okay, so take your last couple of seconds here to get into a comfortable position. If somehow you're listening to this while driving, please do not do this. Do it when you're in a position to safely do it. But we are going to give it a go here, and I will give you audio cues to breathe in, hold, and breathe out. Okay, here we go. So breathe in and hold. Breathe out and hold. Breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. Hold. Breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. Hold. Breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. Hold. Okay, now return to normal breathing. And right now, see if you can notice any slight changes in how you feel. Perhaps you're a little bit more relaxed. Perhaps it's a little bit easier to hold your shoulders down. It could be very subtle. Again, mindfulness is a practice that just one time isn't going to change everything, but it often you can feel something subtle. And the more you do it, the more changes in your nervous system you experience, the more brain changes you experience, as we reviewed earlier. So if box breathing seemed good to you, I encourage you to continue with box breathing. You might be able to find something similar to this on YouTube, or you can just do it in your mind, like I explained. And if box breathing you didn't like, try Headspace, try one of those other apps, try one of those books that I mentioned, and just try things out until you find something that you're like, oh yeah, this makes sense, this feels good, this is something that I could do on a daily basis. So in summary, good on timing. So mindfulness, in summary here, it's an emphasis on developing detached observation and awareness of consciousness, so that you are the one driving the experience and kind of what you're focused on, rather than being led around by these thoughts and feelings that you have. Mindfulness meditation, it effectively reduces physiological symptoms because of this mental physical connection that we know of. So there are high blood pressure, anxiety, panic, depression, mood disorders, all of these, there's research behind it of how mindfulness meditation affects all of these. And then it also provides ways to reduce stress and wind down the nervous system. So getting you out of that fight, flight, or freeze state, helping you get into that rest and digest state, so you can be more resilient and not be one of the trees that breaks when faced with stressors. Let's see, I think that's it. Yes, it is. So thank you very much. Again, here's all of my contact information, including my email address and phone number. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. Again, thank you for your time today. It was fun.
Chris, that was amazing.
Okay.
And I think for a lot of people, I know for myself, sometimes we know this information, but just hearing it again and hearing it a different kind of perspective can be so helpful. And at least for me, it was, and it sort of just affirmed some of the things that I know I've been trying to integrate into my own daily practice. And I love that you reinforce that. I often tell people, like, it's called a practice because you have to practice it.
Yes, right.
And I have found that being able to tap into like the breathing and stuff only works if I really practice it. So I'm so glad that you reinforced that. This was a great session. We really appreciate it. Folks, I hope that you will share it with other people in your life, especially again, during this sort of really busy, high stress holiday time. It's good to be reminded that we have these little bit of skills and tools that we can use to help us. This was fantastic. And like I said, we'll be back next week talking about the grateful brain. And we certainly hope that you will join us next Thursday at 11 for that. And folks who I know often ask, hey, can I get a recording of this? Absolutely. It'll be on our website at namicentraltx.org. So you can probably find that there sometime next week. All right. Thanks, everyone. It was great being here with you today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.